The dispute within the CDU is now escalating beyond all measure. Yesterday, there was Söder's attempted coup. Today, people are talking about Spahn, the man who could bring down the king who wouldn't even bat an eye. To, of course, approach the AfD and above all, to immediately tear down the firewall. What's going on right now, you'll find out in this video. And I'd say, let's start with the first clip.
The next crisis summit is approaching. The leaders of the Black-Red Coalition are convening the Coalition Committee. On the table is an early tax reform for low and middle incomes. Here, too, the SPD and the CDU-CSU bloc are miles apart.
So far apart that now Jens Spahn is really attacking the SPD hard. He wants to drastically cut subsidies for NGOs and also for ideologically driven climate projects. And he knows that by doing this, he will spark the next huge coalition dispute. So the question is, or as Die Welt headlined this morning, will Jens Spahn become the man who brings down Friedrich Merz? What do you think about that? Do you think this person is so obsessed with power that he would let the coalition crash and burn? With his popularity, though, there would be a massive coup. Above all, just imagine all the AfD voters in Germany. They would, of course, immediately see Jens Spahn as a pretty popular politician, because they would see the chance that we might finally get a right-wing conservative policy here in Germany. And if you want to support this channel, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription.
The dissolution van is already parked in front of the CDU headquarters. However, the people in power still don't want to give up the party, the government, and the reforms.
Yes, he said it again in the last few days. Friedrich Merz made it very clear it's only just beginning now. However, they have found a name for this day. And I think the thing with the moving van or the junk removal truck actually describes it pretty well. Because after new elections or after the fall of this chancellor, definitely not as many officials will be needed anymore. Because one thing we know, neither the CDU nor the SPD will need this place as urgently as they do today. And let's be completely honest, if the AfD were to join this government right now, it would bring suffering, death, and violence to this country. And I think that's clear to everyone from the far right to the far left. However, just take a look at what this document is called, which they will be lamenting about this afternoon.
The results are eagerly awaited. However, the term DDay circulating internally can be cause for concern from a historical perspective alone. Because after the failure of the Traffic Light Coalition in 2024, it became known that the FDP had developed a DDay paper in their preparations.
And in it, they simulated the weeks leading up to the breakup of the government.
Yes, by the way, that was when I made that highly controversial video back then. In 48 hours, more than just the vote of confidence is at stake. By the way, I had received this D-Day paper, although at that time the timeline for the dissolution was still quite unclear. However, even here with the so-called D-Day paper, I think we all agree that whenever D-Day was mentioned anywhere, Germany fell into crisis afterwards, and as hard as possible. There was also a D-Day in Normandy, if you can remember, where a great many people were killed. I really have to be careful how I say all this, so I don't have the domestic intelligence agency at my door tomorrow. But I think you know what I'm getting at. At the moment, though, it looks like this government isn't getting any more incentives or agreements. And like I said, in my opinion, of course they want to keep going. Just imagine Friedrich Merz being the chancellor with the shortest term in Germany and thus becoming the most ostracized person. Personally, I could live with that very well, but he probably couldn't.
I've mentioned a few points in the past weeks and I'm not taking them back now. But the first right to information now lies with the coalition partner, and they'll get that tomorrow in the coalition committee.
Did you see that grin of his, that cheeky grin when it comes to our country? Was it just me who took it that way, or do you also see it as an absolute attack on the CDU? The position is clear. tax on the rich, tax the rich, to immediately ask people who work here in Germany and earn a little more than 3,500 euros to pay up, and to take even more away from them, to expand the welfare state even further, even more socialism in Germany. That's how I understood the whole thing, because those were actually his statements, which were also repeated yesterday on the SPD side. And of course, they're in a panic before the elections. Among others, Manuela Schwesig made it very clear again yesterday. She's distancing herself from the SPD once again. That worked so well with Wojtke. And yes, so how are things in Brandenburg these days? Almost everyone thought, man, I wish I hadn't voted for Wojtke, who came across as shaky candidates.
I think it's fine to make mistakes sometimes, but you should admit they were well-intentioned but not well executed, and take it off the table.
Maximum distance from the SPD. Manuela Schwesig says it here. She has no interest in the federal SPD and distances herself in every way. Who actually has, well, elections coming up soon, where the SPD is also far behind here. I think they're still at about 24%. And you can also tell that the election campaign is putting on more and more pressure. That's exactly what they're confronted with at the campaign stands. Yes, they never would have expected that. People are losing trust in their politics. People are saying very clearly, no, we will vote differently in the next elections. You should take a stand now for the policies you're pursuing. And well, this personality-driven campaign went quite well. With Cem Özdemir, it didn't work quite as well for the CDU in the same federal state. I'm just saying, Manuel Hegel, those dough brown eyes, and that's exactly the huge problem. Personality-driven election campaigns are becoming rarer. Manuela Schwesig is aware of this too. And for this reason, she never gets tired of saying over and over again that the AfD will destroy this country, blah. And in the end, well, they're the only ones who have never broken their campaign promises in the history of Germany.
A phenomenon that is increasingly common. Saxony-Anhalt's CDU Minister President Schulze hardly has anything good to say about the basic pension idea of his chancellor and party leader, and he also clearly distanced himself from the relief bonus.
And then, as soon as the elections are over, there's only one topic left. How can we stop the AfD? The citizens don't matter at all. And thirdly, how can you make the most profit off politics? That's all that matters now. And where are all the other minister presidents? Where have all the other campaigners gone? Where is Manuel Hegel with his great proposals? No one has distanced themselves. No one thinks that like Kretschmer does. Now something urgently needs to change, and I mean we have some CDU-led policies. Where is Wüst actually? He must be having a pretty rough time, right? He doesn't really comment much and doesn't distance himself from it either, and he never gets tired of rehashing all of this on TV again and again. Why do you think that is? His election campaign will continue a bit longer, and you'll see him then. In every talk show, everywhere on TV, he never gets tired of distancing himself from federal politics. And that's exactly why I say I would never have had Jens Spahn on my radar, that he would now be undermining Friedrich Merz's position to become chancellor himself. The only thing I know is, if it should come to the point that he replaces Merz, his popularity ratings would of course skyrocket. Just imagine what would happen here in Germany if suddenly 28% of the votes from all over Germany were taken into account. For the next government to start out as a minority government, I explained to you exactly what would be possible in the video last night. But at that time, I hadn't read the news yet that Spahn would become the man who brings down the king. He would probably score a few more points with me too if he went ahead and said, okay, we're forming a minority government and we're going to start talking to everyone now.